Good morning and hello. This is Bill Browder, speaking to you from London via video. The reason that I cannot be with you physically very much ties into the subject of my talk today, which is that I have become Putin's number one enemy, or at least number one foreign enemy, I should say. And I've become his enemy because of the Magnitsky Act. The Magnitsky Act freezes assets and bans visas of human rights violators. And Vladimir Putin is a human rights violator, and he has a lot of assets abroad, and so he feels personally as if he's potentially at risk of being sanctioned under the Magnitsky Act. And he has made it clear that this is something he really is upset by. In 2012, when the Magnitsky Act, before it even had been passed, he made it his single largest foreign policy priority to try to stop it from being passed. And after it was passed, he went on a remarkable crusade to try to stop it, which led to a number of things, including Natalia Veselnitskaya, the Russian lawyer, going to Trump Tower to meet with Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, and Paul Manafort to try to have the Magnitsky Act repealed, and specifically going after me. And Russia has now issued 7 requests to Interpol to have me arrested under a Russian Interpol red notice. And therefore, that's the reason I'm not physically with you today, because it is unsafe for me to travel. For those of you who know me or know my story, you'll remember that in May of this year, I was arrested in Madrid on a Russian Interpol arrest warrant when I had gone to Spain to help the Spanish authorities prosecute Russian money laundering connected to the Magnitsky case. So anyways, that's why I'm not here. I guess the topic of my talk is on Magnitsky sanctions, and particularly Magnitsky sanctions in Europe. And just to give you the lay of the land, since I started this campaign for Magnitsky sanctions after Sergei Magnitsky was murdered, the first country that we succeeded in getting to pass the Magnitsky Act was the United States. In 2012, in December of 2012, the United States Congress and the President signed the very first Magnitsky Act into law. On the basis of that law, there are now 49 Russians who are sanctioned under the Magnitsky Act. Many of them, or most of them, were involved in the torture and murder of Sergei Magnitsky. One of the things which the politicians, the senators who passed the Magnitsky Act, realized was that wait a second, that the Russians who did these crimes are certainly bad people, but there's no reason why an Uzbek human rights violator or a Burmese human rights violator should get a better deal than a Russian human rights violator. And so in 2016, the United States broadened the Magnitsky Act to go from just Russia to being a global Magnitsky Act. On the same day that the United States passed the global Magnitsky Act, the Baltic country of Estonia passed their global Magnitsky Act. That was in December of 2016. Following that, we now have 6 major countries and 2 smaller countries that have Magnitsky Acts. We have the United States, Canada, the UK, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and 2 other countries which are not well known to have Magnitsky Acts, but I'll share it with you today. One is the island of Gibraltar off of Spain. They have a Magnitsky Act. And the other, and this is very new news, is the Channel Island of Jersey last week passed their Magnitsky Act. And so in total, we have 8 countries with Magnitsky Acts. But the most significant thing I can share with you, and the thing that I believe will be a game changer when it happens, is the EU Magnitsky Act. We don't have one yet, but we're getting very close. And I should probably tell you the story of how we got where we are and what happens next. So it's obvious that what will make a big difference to bad guys in Russia and everywhere else is to block them from coming to Europe. It doesn't help if you have huge swaths of territory where Magnitsky Acts don't exist, because if people can't travel to the United States, Canada, and the UK, they'll just travel to France, Spain, and Italy. So we need an EU Magnitsky Act. I realized this very early on, and it's been a long and hard struggle. So I originally went to the Netherlands, and there's no particular logic to why I went to the Netherlands other than I was introduced to some members of parliament there. And in 2011, the Dutch parliament heard my testimony and decided to put forth a resolution calling for the Dutch government to pass a Magnitsky Act. At the time, the foreign minister, Yuri Rosenthal, didn't want to have anything to do with it, and he argued against it in the parliament, saying, please don't do this. Parliament ignored him, and they voted, and the vote was 150-0 to pass a Dutch Magnitsky resolution. The parliament couldn't pass a Magnitsky Act like in the United States. All they could do is pass a resolution calling for the government to do it. Even though the government protested this as if there was some consequence, when the actual resolution was passed, no action was taken by the Netherlands. So I decided at that point I was going to go to the European Union. And so I started going back and forth from London to Brussels, back and forth, meeting with members of the European Parliament. And eventually the campaign got huge traction in Brussels. And in April of 2014, the European Parliament had a vote on an EU Magnitsky Act, and it passed unanimously. And so that was then sent to the head of the External Action Service of the European Union, their foreign ministry, or the State Department of the European Union. And the External Action Service at the time was headed by the current head, Federica Mogherini from Italy. And when she got this across her desk in early 2015 and had to decide to do something about it, she decided that she was going to reject it. And she wrote a letter back to the Parliament saying, I think this is a bad idea. And therefore, she wanted nothing to do with it. So, again, the European Parliament does not have the ability to force foreign policy decisions. That is the sole responsibility of the External Action Service. They rejected it. And in spite of a unanimous resolution coming from democratically elected members of Parliament, nothing happened. So I then started moving around to member states. And as I've mentioned in my introduction, we started having success. First we got Estonia, then we got Lithuania, then we got Latvia, and then we got the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom passed, I would say, very much on the back of the Salisbury poisonings, where it became impossible for Russian appeasers to make their case. So I decided to go back to Holland, where was my original success. And I got together with several members of the Dutch Parliament, a guy named Sjoerdsma, and another one named Peter Omzicht, from two of the opposition parties, or I should say not the main government party. And these two members of Parliament put forth a resolution, or I should say had a conversation first, with the foreign minister, his name is Stefan Blok, and said, hey, don't you think it's time now we have a Dutch Magnitsky Act? Look, there's Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and the UK. And the foreign minister, Mr. Blok, really didn't want to do this. And so he came up with a clever way of making it sound like he was a good guy, but rejecting it, which is knowing full well the situation with the European Union. He wrote he wrote back to them and said, I think this is a great idea to have a Magnitsky Act, but I think we should do it at an EU level. So Mr. Sjoerdsma and Mr. Omzicht, the two members of Parliament, said, okay. And they put forth a resolution to the Dutch Parliament saying that the Dutch government should have 5 months to go to the EU, propose an EU Magnitsky Act, and if it fails, then come back and do domestic legislation. Mr. Bloch wanted nothing to do with this, and he argued against it, and the government party, the main faction, voted against it. But because of the way the Dutch government and parliament is formed, the opposition parties and the smaller coalition partners all voted for the resolution, and as a result of that, they ended up passing the resolution. And now this was in April this year, and the Dutch government had now 5 months to do something. 5 months came and passed, and then in September, the Parliament said, "Well, what are you doing?" And that was the point at which the Dutch foreign minister proposed an EU Magnitsky Act. He didn't do it enthusiastically, he didn't do it willingly, but he did it with one huge omission. He wanted to take Magnitsky's name right off of the Magnitsky Act, thinking that somehow that would make Russia a little bit happier with him. So they took Magnitsky's name off of the EU Magnitsky Act. They put it into the flow of work at the EU. And I'm proud to say that last week, the EU, actually not even last week, this week, the EU has unanimously supported the EU Magnitsky Act. At the moment, it doesn't have Magnitsky's name on it, but I'm sure we will fix that, because in the lead up to this, I was able to get 100 members of parliament and the European Parliament from 20 different countries to write an op-ed jointly signed calling for Magnitsky's name to be on the EU Magnitsky Act. So we're now in the place where the concept has been approved, and the devil will be in the details. And the details will be put together by the same person who didn't want this at the EU, Federica Mogherini. And so I would say we have somewhere between 3 and 5 months to work on the European Union to make sure that they put together an EU Magnitsky Act that works, that has the details in place to make it biting, and for Sergei Magnitsky's legacy, that it has his name on it. So that's my briefing, my speech for the day. I'm sorry I can't be with you. I'm glad that you have watched me and heard my story, and hope to engage in other ways going forward. Thank you very much.